seconds later came an aftershock in the shape of Crank Tech 1, a 6-foot-tall metal man. The first glance at the robotic figure brought a bewildered smile to the faces of the people who were gathering in ragged groups outside the bookshop. It was a film stunt after all, they thought, but where was the director? Adults knelt down by their children's sides and pointed in curiosity. Camera phones were brought out and directed at the creation that stood before them. The robot had emerged from inside the shop and stood just inside the window frame. More people appeared in the square and joined the already growing crowd. Crank stood facing 100 cameras and phones as they clicked away in a flashing frenzy. One person, a teenage boy, was more than just curious. He needed to touch the actor at point-blank range, so he walked towards him. There were a few excited gasps from the gathering crowd as he approached. "Wow! Cool! You are amazing!" he gushed. "They didn't mention this in Sci-Fi Weekly." He stood for a moment transfixed, and then eased forward. When he was within 3 meters of the figure, he raised his phone and focused. There was what seemed to everyone like a flash of light, but it wasn't from the phone. It came from the end of the robot's finger. In a defensive move, the robot raised his arm, and the boy fell to the ground in 2 parts. There was no blood, only the diagonal cut from shoulder to waist exposing the laser-sealed innards of the boy's once functioning organs. The blunt sound he made as he hit the ground brought retching from the onlookers. This was no actor. The boy wasn't moving. The gory act of violence brought chaos to the Cardiff City shopping centre. First, there were screams and the sound of people being physically sick on the shiny new pavement. Then the realization that this wasn't a film stunt after all. It was, in fact, real. Terrified pedestrians stampeded in panic in all directions. Shopping bags were wildly discarded as the mass of panic-stricken office workers, shoppers and the like ran for cover. Crank Tech 1 emerged through the jagged framework of the shattered window and crunched his way over the debris. There was a momentary pause, as if the robot was taking in the sun's rays. He looked magnificent. Almost like a superhero, his pure white outer skin reflected like a gleaming beacon in the brilliance of the day. The only non-white section was a mirrored strip on the upper section of his head. Whoever had created this being had done a fantastic job. His outer skeleton was perfectly smooth, with no hint of joints or moving parts. Inside Crank's brain, 1,000,000 computerized adjustments were taking place. He focused his line of vision and stepped forward with purpose. Each footfall pulverized the glassy shards beneath his feet into fine powder. Crank Tech 1 made his way along the wide, paved area of the new shopping precinct. He marched along the newly built parade and past a huge looped structure of modern art that stood in the square. The android's GPS system eventually led him to the main shopping area. More people scattered when the robot exploded through the huge glass entrance. There were more screams a little further inside when people realized just what was heading their way. Standing at the cross-section of St. David's Centre, Crank Tech 1 was a formidable sight to see. Most of the shoppers had disappeared by now. Shop assistants were cowering behind their counters as supervisors frantically called for help on their security radios. Crank rotated his head in a slow, camera-like movement and stopped. Then, suddenly,